Today we're going to be continuing my James Bond series with the third James Bond film, Goldfinger, so let's talk about it. Hey everybody, my name is Justin. I love to watch movies. If you guys love to watch movies too and James Bond, you guys are in the right spot. We're going to be continuing my James Bond series leading up to the new film, No Time to Die, next April. Today we're going to be talking about Goldfinger, which is the third Sean Connery and third James Bond film that is directed by Guy Hamilton. I'm going to get straight to the point, guys. Goldfinger is my favorite James Bond film. I absolutely love Goldfinger, and watching it the other day for this review, my wife said to me afterwards, "Justin, why do you love Goldfinger so much? You're always talking about it." I said, "You know what? I just do." There's just something about Goldfinger that makes this such a good James Bond film. The powerful tycoon Arik Goldfinger has initiated Operation Grand Slam, a scheme to raid Fort Knox and obliterate the world economy. James Bond, armed with his specially equipped Aston Martin, must stop the plan. Goldfinger was one of the first James Bond films I've ever seen. Goldfinger, Thunderball, Dr. No, most of the Sean Connery films were some of the films that I used to go to the public library and rent a VHS for, go home and watch it for weeks on end until I had to actually return the VHS to the library. So I have vivid memories of watching Goldfinger so much. I have a vinyl of Goldfinger. I have a couple toys of Oddjob and Goldfinger. I've always loved what Goldfinger presented as a James Bond film. Arik Goldfinger is much different compared to James Bond. You look at Goldfinger and you look at James Bond, they are different in sizes. If you had Goldfinger and James Bond in a fist fight, James Bond would easily come out on top. But what makes Goldfinger so sinister is his evil plot and how he goes about sending a certain message. Very early on in the movie, he is caught cheating at playing a card game. James Bond catches him, and Jill Masterson is up on top of this balcony reading the cards off the opponent's hand to Goldfinger. And so she is caught by James Bond. And to send this message that I don't mess around, he douses her in gold paint and kills her. That is a truly sinister thing to do. And from there on, we know that Goldfinger is not someone to mess around with. He is not connected to Spectre, where the two previous films, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, had connection to Spectre. But he's got his own plan, a very clever plan. This is one of my favorite villain schemes of any James Bond movie. His plan is to not get into Fort Knox and steal all the gold. His plan is to detonate a dirty bomb inside a vault and irradiate the gold and make it useless for 58 years. That in turn makes his gold more valuable. That is such a big villain thing to do, and it's one of my favorite plots of any James Bond movies. It makes him such a clever villain and someone that is challenging James Bond to the extreme, more than Dr. No or more than Rosa Klebb has ever done. And paired with Goldfinger is his henchman, Oddjob. Oddjob is so brute. He has this hat that has a steel cut around it, and he throws it. He can destroy statues and kill people with it, and even in fist-to-fist combat, he still poses a threat to James Bond. Oddjob is easily one of the best henchmen, besides maybe Jaws, out of any James Bond movies. When you think of classic henchmen in James Bond movies, Oddjob and Jaws are two of the ones that come to mind. This film is filled with action, much more action than we got from Dr. No and From Russia with Love, and we get the stylish Aston Martin in here that is filled with different gadgets. From here on out, with all the James Bond movies, now we have these outrageous gadgets for James Bond to use while in an action sequence. So as he's driving around and he is being chased by people, he is in his Aston Martin and he has these different things that he can use that leads to some really intense and well-filmed action sequences. This also has such a terrific score by John Barry. Great opening sequence by the song Goldfinger by Shirley Bassey that has stood the test of time.
Goldfinger, he's the man with the Midas touch.
So John Barry's score adds to those intense moments, and his score fits perfectly with whatever action sequence is going on. We also, in this movie, and it's such an interesting name and has set a tone for Bond girls' names throughout the history of James Bond, and that is Pussy Galore. And I read a little bit about why they decided to go with Pussy Galore and why they chose to not have it be Kitty Galore, and it's pretty funny if you actually read up on it. She is Goldfinger's personal pilot and the leader of an all-female team of pilots known as Pussy Galore's Flying Circus. She's great in the role. I really enjoy her performance in here. She's able to do things on her own. She doesn't need much help from people, and she's easily one of the more memorable James Bond girls, not just by her name. Goldfinger is, like I said, my favorite James Bond film. It has such a clever plot and one of the most iconic James Bond lines of all time.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. There is nothing you can talk to me about that I don't already know.
And such a ruthless, sinister villain whose plot is much different compared to typical James Bond villains. It is well thought out. He has an awesome henchman. There's so many good action sequences in here. This movie is filmed beautifully and just so many things I love about Goldfinger. And so when my wife asked me, why do I love Goldfinger? I told her all of those reasons. This is the James Bond film that I've seen the most, and it's crazy that this film has stood the test of time for me. It has always been my favorite James Bond film, and I think that it will always remain my favorite James Bond film. There's a few that have come pretty close, but Goldfinger is easily my favorite James Bond film, and I'm going to go ahead and give it an A+. Thank you guys for checking out my review for Goldfinger, the third James Bond movie. I was so excited to talk about this one, and we are moving forward now. Next week, I'll have a review for Thunderball, the fourth Sean Connery film, leading up to No Time to Die, starring Daniel Craig, coming out next April. I'm so excited to start talking more about James Bond movies. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that bell notification for more up and coming James Bond videos. My name is JustinWatchesMovies, and you guys stay classy, YouTube.